Live from New Delhi, you're watching a special broadcast from the 17th BRICS Summit currently underway in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. BRICS, as we know, is a group of major emerging economies which expanded last year beyond Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. That's BRICS to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I'm Gautam Roy.
Yes, over the next 2 hours, we'll connect with our correspondents on the ground in Rio de Janeiro and our expert panel from India to understand the different facets of the ongoing 17th BRICS Summit. I'm Tanvi Taneja. On Sunday, we saw the BRICS leaders adopt the Rio Declaration, a 31-page, 126-point joint declaration committing to unity, equality, cooperation and reform for peace, inclusive growth, sustainable development and a fairer global order.
And leaders of the BRICS group of developing nations are next prepared to address the shared challenges of climate change on the final day of the summit in Rio. So, let's get the show on the road.
So as we told you, the leaders of the BRICS countries met in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on 6th and 7th of July for the 17th BRICS Summit with the theme, Strengthening Global South Cooperation for a More Inclusive and Sustainable Governance.
Well, the leaders issued a 31-page, 126-point joint declaration condemning terrorist attacks, including the Pahalgam terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir on the 22nd of April earlier this year.
The leaders reaffirmed commitment to combating terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including cross-border movement of terrorists, terrorism financing and safe havens.
They urged zero tolerance for terrorism and rejected double standards in countering terrorism. They called for an expeditious finalization and adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism in the UN framework.
The leaders called for concerted actions against all UN-designated terrorists and terrorist entities.
Also in the joint declaration, BRICS leaders advocated for a comprehensive reform of the United Nations, including the UN Security Council.
The leaders reiterated support for a comprehensive reform of the United Nations Security Council with a view to making it more democratic, representative, effective and efficient, and to increase the representation of developing countries in the Council's membership so that it can adequately respond to prevailing global challenges.
The leaders also stressed that the United Nations Security Council reform will lead to the amplified voice of the Global South.
Further, the leaders reiterated support to the aspirations of India and Brazil to play a greater role in the United Nations, including its Security Council.
And another key highlight of the declaration was the commitment towards combating climate change and promoting sustainable, fair and inclusive development.
The declaration emphasized ensuring accessible, timely and affordable climate finance for developing countries. The leaders adopted the Leaders' Framework Declaration on Climate Finance to demonstrate that the ambitious climate action can advance prosperity and a better future for everyone. It addressed challenges threatening the planet and future, such as climate change.
The leaders of the BRICS nations supported India's candidacy to host COP33 in 2028 and reiterated its commitment to tackle climate change by strengthening the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement.
So the leaders' joint statement issued after the first day of the 17th BRICS Summit in Rio de Janeiro resonates with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's views in a very broad term, including the condemnation of terrorism in all its forms.
Addressing the media, MES Secretary Damu Ravi said that the condemnation of the Pahalgam terrorist attack in the strongest terms by all the countries was an important highlight of the summit. He said that the declaration gives a strong message to India's neighbours. MES Secretary also said that Prime Minister Modi termed Pahalgam terror attack a reminder of terrorism's threat to global peace and called for unwavering international solidarity on the matter.
Honorable Prime Minister underlined that terrorism was a grave threat facing humanity. In this context, he noted that all the leaders have condemned Pahalgam terrorist attack in strongest terms. He underlined that the attack, the Pahalgam attack, terror attack, is an onslaught on the entire humanity. He also noted that those funding, promoting and providing safe havens to terrorists must be dealt with in the harshest terms.
Ministry of External Affairs Secretary Damu Ravi added that the BRICS group of countries have extended their strong support for a comprehensive convention on international terrorism, which has been India's initiative in the United Nations.
Now,
from India's point of view, most of our concerns have been very well captured. I would like to bring to you your attention on the para 6, where there is a very strong expression for reform of the global multilateral institutions, in particular the UN and the UN Security Council, in which countries of the Global South to play an active role. And this time, that para and that formulation has been further strengthened over the Kazan's formulation, where it got reiterated, reinforced in terms of India and Brazil to play an active role in international affairs and multilateral bodies.
the MA Secretary also said that the leaders' joint statement issued after the BRICS summit in Rio addresses most of India's concerns about reform in multilateral bodies.
In the session on strengthening multilateralism, economic, financial affairs and artificial intelligence, Honorable Prime Minister expressed that diversity and multipolarity were valued strengths of the BRICS. He added that BRICS could play an important role in shaping a multipolar world. In this context, he also gave few suggestions in terms of considering setting up a science and research repository in the BRICS groups by the Global South countries to focus on supply chains of the critical minerals.
Prime Minister Modi reiterated that the global organizations of the 20th century lacked the capacity to deal with the challenges of the 21st century, and therefore he underscored the importance of reforming the multilateral organizations.
He reiterated that the global organizations of the 20th century lacked the capacity to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. And therefore, he underscored the importance of reforming the multilateral organizations. He called for a multipolar and inclusive world order and stated that the global governance institutions, particularly the UN Security Council, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, must undergo urgent reform to reflect the contemporary realities and times.
The MA Secretary also said that the visit of Prime Minister Modi to the BRICS assumes added importance as it elevated the summit. This is because India is the founding member of BRICS and will be taking over the chair next year. India will carry forward these agendas during its chairpersonship. He informed that during the second day of the BRICS summit, which is today, 3 sessions on environment, COP30 and global health will be held.
The Prime Minister reiterated India's deep commitment to environmental action. So he's expected to also elaborate on the initiatives taken by India to promote people and pro-planet growth and development in this session. He will highlight initiatives on the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure CDRI, the Biofuel Alliance and the Big Cat Mission.
All right, so quite a lot packed in today as well on day 2 of the BRICS summit. Apart from a very, very eventful day one of the summit as well. And to talk about it all, we have with us Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakrabarti. He's former Secretary, the Ministry of External Affairs. And we also have Dr. Rajan Kumar, School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to you both. If I could come to you, Ambassador, first in terms of what has happened on day one, the kind of assertive way the leaders, particularly both Prime Minister Modi and President Lula, have put across the issues that not just are common for the BRICS but also for the global South, and the way they have pointed out how the West's response has been inadequate in several areas where an urgent need is really there for reaching out to the global South. Do you feel that this will have the kind of impact, the desired impact where the West is concerned, particularly America as well as Europe?
Well, let me begin by saying that BRICS is one sort of peg in the overall global situation where there is an inobservable move towards multilateralism. And that has been mentioned traditionally, I think, for PM. Second is the fact that this is a very long declaration, covers almost all, highlights almost all the major, national concerns that have been there for quite some time. To your pointed question about whether the West will take this into consideration, well, they will have to some extent, but they will fight back because the American and the Western system, which has sort of dominated the international order for such a long time, nobody wants to relinquish that power, and I believe that the Americans and the Western world will obviously fight it out, and you can see that President Trump has issued threats to BRICS and saying that anybody who associates with BRICS will have extra 10% tariff imposed on it. He had earlier threatened that if BRICS moves towards an alternate currency, then he will impose 100% tariff on these countries. So these threats are already emanating. It proves that BRICS is being seen as one of the emerging sort of associations, which some people of course feel that it's anti-Western, but that is not so. I believe that it must be seen in the context of a multipolar world, which the world is inevitably going to move. And that is why I think BRICS, although BRICS itself has internal issues among its member countries, and this time, for example, President Putin and President Xi did not attend. So that actually lowers the profile of BRICS, at least in this summit.
Okay, Dr. Raju, coming to you now, as Ambassador Chakrabarti was saying that Donald Trump has issued threats for the BRICS nations, but Kremlin has now responded to it, saying that the BRICS group of nations had never been working to undermine other countries. And yesterday, in his remarks, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the era of liberal globalization is now obsolete and that the future belongs to swiftly growing emerging economies. Your take on that?
Thank you for having me here first. This is very interesting. In fact, if the threat is coming from the President of the United States, then remember that BRICS has to be taken seriously. Till now, the Western countries and most of the Western experts, they have been saying that BRICS is an acronym without substance, which means, the countries are very not homogeneous. Countries are geographically distant. They don't share any history. They don't share any culture. And BRICS will hardly get mentioned in the, if you see 10 years back, not many newspapers or media of the West, they will take it seriously. But now if the President Trump is tweeting that there'll be a tariff on the BRICS countries, so that's a welcome sign from the BRICS perspective. Yes, he can do it, but let me tell you that kind of unpredictable world that we are living in, and the kind of chaos which has been created, partly because of the way Western countries are behaving. United States, for instance, is withdrawing from a number of institutions, be it the WHO or Paris Climate Change, etc. The United Nations Security Council has become largely dysfunctional. The reason being the world is polarized, the world is fragmented at the moment, and the institutions which served a good purpose, some purpose in the 20th century, they are not serving, they are not serving the cause, the reason why they were created. For instance, in United Nations Security Council, it has failed to play an important role either in Russia-Ukraine crisis or in the Gaza-Israel war, etc. So in that context, the summit is very important, and as Ambassador Chakravarti rightly pointed out, that this is not an anti-Western organization. This is a non-Western organization. That's true. Russia is also not a member of the West. Ideally, it calls itself a Eurasian country. So it's a non-Western organization, and if you see the agenda and if you see some of the points in the declaration, the joint declaration which has come out, it clearly says that it believes in the United Nations Security Council, it believes in the sovereignty of the nation, it believes in the international law, etc. So to argue that BRICS is working against the international order, that is not correct. Yes, what BRICS is trying to do over the last 17 summits, including this one, that it is trying to say to the Western countries that please reform the Western institutions, especially United Nations Security Council, IMF, World Bank, and the WTO. Now, the WTO, which used to be the real organization for making laws on trade, etc., that has also become ineffective. United States is not appointing judges for the resolution of the dispute, etc. So, in that situation, how do these countries, which are emerging, which are becoming economically very powerful, in terms of PPP, the economy of the BRICS country will go up to about, say, 40%. And it has overtaken G7. So that also please keep in mind. So what these countries are saying that if you are trying to violate international law, US is also violating. For instance, a number of issues, be it WTO, be it climate change, etc. So US is not respecting many of the international institutions, in which case these countries, BRICS countries, they have two choices. Either they push for reforms, very forcefully they push for reforms, and let me tell you that reform of the United Nations in this present context is not possible. So since that is not happening, gradually BRICS countries, they are trying to create an alternative framework. At this moment, I'll say that is still very symbolic and very declaratory in nature, and the implementation is a real challenge for BRICS given the diversity, heterogeneity this organization has. But gradually, if the US behaves like it, that it will put tariff on all the countries, if it will withdraw from a number of institutions, then these countries will not have any choice except creating alternative trading framework, alternative rules on the climate change and this sustainable development, poverty alleviation, and also on artificial intelligence, etc. And that's what they're trying to say at this moment. So I would like to say that BRICS has become an important organization, and it will not, let me tell you that none of the countries except probably Saudi Arabia will get really threatened by the Trump or what other countries are saying.
Right. Ambassador Chakravarti, if I could ask you, Donald Trump has threatened that there will be an additional 10% tariff for any country that is aligning with the BRICS in anti-American policies. Now, earlier it used to be that Donald Trump used to say that BRICS is dead because they wanted to come up with an alternative currency to the dollar. They wanted to de-dollarize as well, and that is not happening. And it is true that a BRICS currency is as good as dead, but it's not clear as to what has really provoked Donald Trump this time around. Do you think there are parts of the BRICS declaration that he might have a problem with specific to America, or is it just the way Donald Trump is?
Well, it's both actually. It's the way he operates and the way he thinks, he should conduct foreign affairs. So he believes that disruption is a good tool in foreign policy, and that can lead to, I think, a churn from which America can gain. Yes, in the sense that he has attacked the BRICS because there are some factors in which they might perceive that these are against American interests. Now, American interests are entrenched in the status quo of the international order that was formed after the Second World War. So I think the world has moved on, far moved on since 1945, when the UN was formed, or the other Bretton Woods institutions were formed. It's time for a change. Or no organization can remain rooted in the past and avoid changing according to the changing international situation. This is the problem, I think, because they are unable to adjust, whereas the BRICS countries and the emerging economies are basically saying that it's time to adjust and change. So it's a very logical and rational approach that the BRICS has taken. One other factor that might be worrying the Americans is that many BRICS countries and other countries also are increasingly trading in their own currency and are not going through the dollar. So which means that the dollar's role in the international monetary system and financial system is being sort of eroded, gradually, but it's being eroded. Nobody is saying in BRICS that we want to replace the dollar or anything. And, statements have been made already. Right? So I would believe that the changing order, the international order, is being reflected by the BRICS declaration. And I think it's high time that the US and the West recognize we can all sit together and devise changes that can be done. There are, of course, I must add, like the UN Security Council, despite what the BRICS declaration says about India and Brazil being, should play a bigger role, etc. China is vehemently opposed to India's membership of the Security Council as a permanent member. So we know what kind of a role China plays. So I mean, China's sometimes public posture is quite different from it actually does, and that is true of other countries also, not just China. But China is, of course, the master player in doublespeak, and hence we'll have to see how far the BRICS can actually become a more cohesive unit. So far, they have in the domain of economic diplomacy, etc., financial and cybersecurity, others, they are trying to cooperate and build up systems that will help the global south as well to navigate this changing international order. But there will be challenges. Those who will feel in the West, particularly the US, that it is losing its hegemony in this in the international order, they will protest. They will take countermeasures, etc., and we have to be prepared.
Okay, Ambassador Chakrabarti, we'll talk about the challenges in front of BRICS in more detail now in a short while. But for now, let's tell our viewers about some reactions that are pouring in on Donald Trump's 10% tariff threat for the BRICS nations. South Africa's Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that the BRICS group should be seen as a push for reformed multilateralism, nothing more. This statement came after US President Donald Trump accused BRICS of anti-American policies and threatened an extra 10% tariff on countries aligned with it.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin has said that the BRICS group of nations had never been working to undermine other countries.
We have indeed seen such statements by President Trump, but it is very important to note here that the uniqueness of a group like BRICS is that it is a group of countries that share common approaches and a common worldview on how to cooperate based on their own interest. And this cooperation within BRICS has never been and will never be directed against any third countries.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Yes, so Dr. Raju, coming to you, we were talking about the challenges, of course, in front of BRICS. Yesterday, the long joint statement that came out on adopting the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism did talk about, condemning terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Also talked about, the joint declaration talked about the expansion of the UN Security Council, but it fell short of naming the number of permanent and non-permanent members. Why do you think there was little clarity on that?
Well, are you trying to say that these countries didn't say that who should become a member of United Nations Security Council? Is that the question?
Yes, in the declaration, declaration they've asked for expansion of the UN Security Council, but no mention of the permanent and the non-permanent members. Why is that?
Well, I think the real reason is that why the BRICS declaration or any declaration of this kind cannot mention any name that who should be included in the Security Council and who should not.
In any case, there are multiple aspirants to that particular
slot
within the BRICS itself.
Yeah, that's right. Because there is a lack of consensus, let me tell you, when it comes to United Nations Security Council reform. So there is total lack of consensus. You can have regional powers from each region, but at least what is needed at this moment is that India should be the member. You should have one member from South Africa, one or two members maybe. You should have one or two members from Latin America. Japan and Germany, they are the important contenders. So you can pick up from the countries of the G20 broadly, because they are the ones who will decide the global governance in the future. But having said that, let me tell you, there is no consensus. And even the countries of the West, they are paying simply the lip service when it comes to including other members. US, France, Russia included, Britain, France, etc. So they all say that it should be expanded and country like India should be included. But when it comes to real reforms, because these are the privileged nations and they do not want to get away, they don't want to compromise with their privileges. So as a consequence, even when they say that whenever some delegate or the head of the state will come to India, he'll say that India should be included as it become repetitive. But when it comes to actual reform, there is no push coming from these countries also. Yes, China will create an obstacle. China will never support. It's very unlikely that China will support the case of India unless and until there is some broader policy framework in which India automatically becomes a member. But otherwise, the criteria has to be developed. The criteria is, there is no consensus. Which country, for instance, there are too many claimants in South Africa. Nigeria is a claimant, Egypt is a claimant, South Africa is a claimant. So there are a lot of issues why this kind of declaration cannot name. At the moment, this kind of declaration will put in the principle that these are the principles on which this United Nations Security Council should be reformed. Yes,
well, we basically have to put it out in black and white, really, in terms of what really stands in the way of UNSC reforms and what has been also standing in the way for something that India has been advocating, Ambassador Chakravarti, for a long time, for more than 2 decades, which is the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. So far, there's been no consensus even on a definition of terrorism, and every time that India seeks some action, thankfully it's moved forward. Here in the case of BRICS, in the declaration, Kashmir has been mentioned, the incident that took place in Pahalgam has been mentioned, but if you just track back a couple of weeks back what happened as far as the SCO Defence Ministers meet is concerned, one can clearly see that there's lack of consensus on this issue as well.
Well, this has been a long-standing issue, and there are 2 aspects to it. One is the usual phrase we use when talking about this issue, is that one man's terrorist is the other man's freedom fighter. So somebody who's is talking about terrorism or terrorist acts, there's somebody else who who's sponsoring it will say no, they are freedom fighters. So this aspect has to be kept in mind, that there is no consensus. Just as the UNSC expansion, there is no consensus, as Professor rightly narrated. There is no consensus on this issue as well. And don't forget that terrorism is used as a useful tool in foreign policy. That is the second aspect. And hence, many countries, say, okay, let the debate continue. This is like the UNSC debate, that let it continue, and there are naysayers who will ensure that the debate continues, but nothing happens. Terrorism convention, or the International Convention on Terrorism, I would put it in the same in corner that, okay, let the debate continue, but no consensus. This is the problem with the United Nations, where you need consensus, or it can be put to vote, and we can see whether it works. But that is not happening, because the great powers or the major countries probably do not want, because the great powers exercise their power through various foreign policy tools, economic sanctions, financial sanctions, even military, sanctions or military hardware and other things that we have seen, all the time. And then they also compromise with terrorism, because somehow the country that sponsors terrorism may be useful for their own interests. And that is, Pakistan is a classic case. And so there's been a lot of writing on this, how the Americans use Pakistan to further their interests, or either with China, or they have certain facilities in Pakistan which they think is vital for their interest, and hence they overlook or look the other way when Pakistan, indulges in terrorism, which is a well-known fact and the whole world knows it. But then this is the problem. There is a lot of hypocrisy and double standards in international relations. Although nations tend to pose, make moral postures, etc. Take the USA, which has always said, champions of human rights. But then, one can go into great detail of how human rights have been, generally trampled all over the world because of American interests. So that's the world we live in, and we have to recognize that, be realistic. And that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to navigate. We are not going to join any blocks, and we will do what we have to do. We are not anti-Western, because we have enough interest with the Western countries, nor are we anti anybody else. And we simply want to grow. Like the economic growth is our first priority, and the South, global South, also looks at it that way. So there is some consensus in BRICS and the global South that let us concentrate on economic growth, etc. But then the great powers have their own interests, and they try to manipulate various issues which somehow impedes this consensus and the growth of multilateralism.
Dr. Raju, but what was heartening to see in the declaration that there was a collective condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack, in which 26 civilians were killed on April 22nd. Your take on that, the mention of the word cross-border terrorism featuring in the declaration?
Well, thank you for asking me this question. This is very smart move, let me tell you. Probably it happened because of very vigorous Indian diplomacy, because we couldn't get it done at Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So what probably happened here, that India also compromised on something, because India's policy, if you see, there is a slight change from just a few weeks back, Shanghai Cooperation Organization's declaration, where Iran has been mentioned, Israeli action has been condemned, and India's the terrorist attack on India has been mentioned, and that's an important development from India's perspective. And not only India, why India? Because terrorism is an act which affects all the countries of the BRICS. So from that perspective, this is important. Also, the clause does not mention the name, Pakistan, but it does say cross-border terrorism. And in the case of India, cross-border terrorism essentially refers to that country. So that, in my view, is an important development and very satisfactory to India, that we managed to, and that puts pressure on Pakistan, because if BRICS countries are at least issuing a declaration in which cross-border terrorism, first it has been identified as an act of terrorism, because China would say that this is not an act of terrorism, but that means China has also agreed to that. It also, because there are a large number of countries, Islamic states, etc., so they also agree that this was an act of terrorism, and the fact that this this act of terrorism has come from a certain country, so it puts pressure on that. And also, because it doesn't stop there. If you see the few clauses which are following that declaration, so it says that it will try to work together on stopping the financing, etc., of terrorism. So it also sends a message to organizations like FATF, and FATF is important because this has direct implication on say Pakistan's credit and the loan, etc., that it gets. So in my view, although this is not the first time, let me tell you, earlier also in one or two of the BRICS declaration, the exact name from the terrorist organization operating for Pakistan, they were also mentioned. So, but this time Pahalgam is an important development and it's a very recent development. So that is very important from India's perspective. And it talks of convention, that convention within the United Nations framework. So if that convention happens, so at least the issue will get international publicity, and some of the countries which are sponsoring terrorism, they would come under pressure. Although, let me tell you that at this point of time, I don't see that any consensus would emerge on the issue of terrorism, even if a convention happens within the framework of the United Nations. But yes, we have to keep working. We have to put pressure on the neighboring country through several organizations, including BRICS. We have raised this issue a number of times. In fact, every year practically we have raised this issue in the United Nations speech that either has been delivered either by Prime Minister or the External Affairs Minister. So, so we need to internationalize this issue. We need to, say that this is an issue where India, and we need to say that India's policy has changed, and India will not tolerate this kind of the act of terrorism from other country. And the policy is that if this happens, the country would be held responsible and action would be taken. So that's a new policy.
It's an interesting juxtaposition as well, because the declaration included cross-border movement of terrorists, and Prime Minister Modi also called for sanctions against entities that practice terrorism, terrorist entities, as well as UN designated terrorists. So that sort of ups the ante against terrorism as well, and further puts, although not named anywhere in the declaration, but it further puts Pakistan in the dock. Let me now bring in my colleague Meghna Dev, who's joining us from Rio de Janeiro. She's been tracking all the developments as far as this leg of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Brazil is concerned. Welcome to the show, Meghna, and just tell us, it was a packed day yesterday and very impactful as well. We saw how Donald Trump has reacted to it, but just tell us what's in store on day two.
Obviously, there is going to be a family photo, and then after that, we'll be seeing this session on COP30, environment as well as health. That is going to be important because when we did see that yesterday, there were talks about UNSC reforms, terrorism broadly very intensively covered. We did see, not only in President Lula's intervention, but also Prime Minister Narendra Modi, clearly said that condemning terrorism should not be a matter of convenience, but of principle. So having said all of that, definitely the declaration, we clearly see that there is a mention of how important land degradation, dust storms, plastic pollution, battling all these challenges is, and especially for the countries of the global south, there is a very important need of adequate climate financing, carbon sinks. We are also talking about how these countries will be able to mitigate the challenges that is, that are emerging because of climate change. And not only this, the declaration also says, I would like to read the paragraph 90 here, when it says that the BRICS acknowledges that fossil fuels will still play an important role in the world's energy mix, particularly for emerging markets and developing countries and developing economies, and we recognize the need to promote inclusive energy transitions. So that is also very essential, that how the emerging economies will be able to have a very balanced and smooth energy transition. So that is also something that will be discussed. And when COP30 will also be held in Brazil, it becomes even more important for the BRICS also to discuss on this. And the declaration also clearly says that the BRICS countries support India's that India will be carrying out the BRICS in the COP33 in 2028. So definitely there is a lot on agenda, especially in terms of sustainability, climate change, environment, and obviously the COP30 that is going to take place this year in Brazil.
Okay, Meghna, yes, we're looking forward to that session on environment, COP30 and global health. But going back to that eventful and impactful day one, could you summarize for our viewers what other essential points were raised by other BRICS nations? We've heard what Prime Minister Modi has said, important statements on terrorism, the highlight of his address. But what were the other points raised by Brazilian President and Russian President also?
Well, when we see that the declaration, obviously it's a 30-page declaration over 120 paragraphs encapsulating different areas. There was also talk about the debt servicing of obviously after the COVID, there are a number of countries of the global south facing the debt issue. Besides, obviously, how the new development bank can help the developmental initiatives in the BRICS nations. Besides that, there was also talk about a cross-border payments initiative. Now that initiative is going to help the BRICS nations for trade in their national currencies. So the interoperability will be discussed between the countries, and the governors of the central banks and the higher authorities, officials of the respective nations have been given this task to see that how this can be worked out. So this will help facilitate trade between intra-BRICS trade. So this will help facilitate that. So that is going to be a very important thing, that if it works out well between the nations, that there will be trade in their national currencies. Besides that, what we see is obviously climate change has been talked about, as I said earlier, but artificial intelligence has also been talked about. Responsible use of AI, there has to be regulations, how AI can be misused, what kind of policy has to be put in place. So this is all what has also been discussed between leaders. So when we actually, and obviously there has been a very strong consensus on the UNSC reforms, how Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean needs a representation at the horseshoe table. It's very important that amongst the BRICS nations, when the BRICS nations have reaffirmed their commitment to multilateralism, peace, and obviously combating terrorism, this is also something that has been unanimously voiced at the BRICS summit, the UNSC reforms. And clearly, when we actually look at the language, it clearly shows that this is something that now the global south will not have much patience with. So clearly very strong words used specifically in terms of the UNSC reforms, and also in terms of combating terrorism, where we did see that it was a direct message to the neighbors, and we also saw that Amy also said that it is going to be a clear message to the neighbors when
Right.
there was mention about cross-border terrorism, people providing safe haven to terrorists, and also terror financing.
And
So
Meghna,
very important aspects in the declaration, clearly aligning with India's priorities for the BRICS.
All
Yes,
right.
Gautam.
And Meghna, in terms of the start of day two, sort of agenda has been laid, or a challenge has been thrown by Donald Trump, talking about 10% extra tariffs against anti-American policies and those aligning with the BRICS formulation. So what has been the reaction so far? What is the buzz there in Rio itself at the Museum of Modern Arts, which is the venue for the BRICS summit? Because we've already seen the kind of reactions that have come in from the Kremlin, from South Africa, as well as China, saying that it does not see confrontation, but it feels that it's wrong to use tariffs as an instrument of coercion.
Yes, definitely tariffs were talked about, but we do actually see the kind of reactions that have come from the Kremlin. that have come from the Kremlin, and also from we'll also be seeing that the leaders did discuss on the economic front yesterday, and I have also what was on the agenda in terms of specifically when we see what was on the agenda was in terms of loans, obviously in terms of taxation, in terms of how the BRICS. So this is nothing against when we are talking about the BRICS, nothing against the West, but definitely this is something that the BRICS wants to build within itself in terms of trade and economy. So this is something that was clearly talked about in the declaration, but we'll definitely have to see what today, what discussions happened today, and what are the reactions that comes out from the leaders.
Okay, Meghna, let me bring in our guests now. Ambassador Chakrabarti, why is it that China has chosen to send its Premier Li Qiang to attend the BRICS summit this time? There are reports which keep circulating, of course, every now and then. Is Xi Jinping stepping down? Or is it their domestic politics taking pressure on Xi Jinping?
Well, it's very difficult to pin down the reasons. We've all seen the reports which are speculative. But so one can list out the reasons, but one cannot pinpoint as to what exactly has caused this. Well, for example, Mr. Putin, President Putin, the reason given out that since the ICC warrant for his arrest, and Brazil being a member of the ICC, bound by that, etc. But I think, well, that those are reasons which Brazil has never said. So this is very speculative. So President Xi may be busy with issue, or he may have thought that, oh, President Lula I've just met a few months back, so there's no need for me. But clearly, his being out of the, avoiding attending the meeting does send a signal that. But that must be what China. So what is interesting to note is that China has put obviously some issue or some interest above attending the BRICS summit. Hence, this is what I was trying to point out, that many countries and nations and leaders will look at their own situation or their own interests or their country's interests sometimes to avoid going somewhere. And that is something that we have seen also India doing, in the sense that PM Modi was invited to Washington at the same time when the Field Marshal of Pakistan was there. And clearly, I think this was, I don't know whether the American establishment, promoted this thing, or it was just an offhand, typical Trump, off the cuff thing that, okay, let me be a peacemaker, so I'll invite Prime Minister Modi. But Prime Minister Modi made it very clear in the telephone call that he doesn't want mediation. And that, I mean, how would it look? I mean, it was not a very wise or a sagacious move by President Trump. So I do believe that the American establishment would not have supported. But then you never know. President Trump is like that. So in the same way, President Xi may be calculating some issues that might affect him if he leaves the country. So that could be one of the reasons why he dropped out.
Right. So there you have it. In terms of how things are progressing, it hasn't really made much of an impact whether one leader has been absent or not, except for people getting the impression that somewhere the profile of BRICS has been lowered, although he has sent in Li Qiang as well. So we do have a fairly senior representation from China there. But as far as today's issues are concerned, Dr. Rajan Kumar, what do you make of how all the BRICS members, particularly India, will put across the kind of measures when it comes to the environment, the issues related to how there is a commitment that everyone has made in Paris that has to be articulated, because in the declaration it's clearly been said that all this talk of the West saying the coal has to be phased out first is not something that the BRICS is ready to accept.
Absolutely, the message which has gone on this particular issue of, say, the climate change, etc., because US has withdrawn from the Paris climate change. So it was the responsibility of either the European country or the BRICS countries or the emerging countries to take this step forward. Had India and China, if these two countries had withdrawn from Paris climate change, I can tell you, Gautam, that the climate change negotiation is dead. Because without these countries, now this kind of they are the energy guzzlers. They are the maximum consumers of energy. But now, since BRICS has kind of supported the idea of climate change, and what BRICS is saying, and there are a few important things here. First, it says that it agrees to Paris climate change. Second, UNFCCC, etc. The meeting is going to take place. 30th meeting will take place in Brazil only. The second point which is being said, and which these countries have repeatedly said in all the COP30, COP26, 27, 28 meetings, that there has to be a differential responsibility, because you cannot have same kind of responsibility from the developed country and also from the countries which are not developed or which are the least developed countries. So that differential responsibility is important. The kind of commitments which have been made time and again by the developed countries or financing, they have not followed. They have not pursued that kind of commitment. They have not acted on that commitment. So that is being said, that financing from the developed country, that is important thing. And also there, this declaration also talks about greenhouse gas emission, etc. It mentions the word Kyoto Protocol and Paris climate. So these are very important developments, because now US is not taking the responsibility. The hegemon, the country which has benefited the most from the liberal international order, if that country is withdrawing from this kind of negotiation, and Trump's policy, as you know, he's clearly promoting the fossil fuel and reversing the policy of Biden administration. So in that situation, the world, the responsibility of the responsibility of the climate change has to be taken by the emerging countries, and BRICS declaration and BRICS responsibility, BRICS taking the responsibility, it gives an important message to the European country, at least, that if you cannot cooperate with the United States on this issue, you can cooperate with the BRICS countries. So that is important development in my perspective.
Okay, Ambassador Chakrabarti, so as BRICS nations are demanding climate finance for themselves from developed countries, would Trump now even call this anti-American?
Not really. I think, the finance issue has, of course, dogged all the agreements. Kyoto Protocol, for example, and the Western developed countries don't want to spend money on it. And they will spend money in their own country for climate change, etc., but not give money to the country, the developing country. It basically has become an issue between developed and they expect the developing countries to pay for their mistakes and their pollution of the climate, and this is very unfair. And I think this is something that will go on. The pressure is building up, and some solution has to be found. And of course, they are pushing the developing countries, global south. You spend money on climate change mitigation and adaptation, from your own, on your own. I mean, we agree to these things. So they are basically, trying to get themselves out of that. And the US, of course, has walked out. And so they find that nothing can be done. Them. So it's a typical behavior of a global power which thinks that it can get away with anything. So that's the climate, international order, and the climate and the ambience we are living through. And hence, it's a changing international order. But I think it's going to be a very, very long, hard battle. And battle of attrition. Slowly will happen. But then, by then, I don't know how much climate have surveyed, and everybody would suffer. The question is, climate change affects everybody. And I think some countries suffer more, some less, but everybody. So I think it's a very myopic vision that has been followed by the Western countries. And I think it's high time. But I do believe that that the Europeans might take a little different, so they're having their own problems. But with Trump, Trump, for example, they are NATO allies. Trump, in fact, pressurized them, to increase their own spending, etc., which they have done. But then these kind of pressures are being built up from the Europeans.
Right, Ambassador Chakrabarti, there's some issue with your audio. We'll try and reconnect, and in the meantime, we'll take a quick break as well. As part of this special show, we are staying on getting you all the latest where the BRICS summit is concerned in Rio. It's day 2 now after a very eventful day 1. Keep tracking all the developments with us, that is me as well as Sanvi and our entire team. We have our people there in Rio as well to get us every development that is taking place. So do stay tuned.
Can the US launch a bombing campaign against Iran? The Philippines vessel suffered structural damage. The saga of child sexual abuse is the United States China's debt trap strategy. Truth is stranger than fiction. But sometimes hard to uncover. Trust us to tell the truth, unadulterated and pure, of every story that matters to you. You read between the lines, cut the clutter, and connect the dots to get you the full picture. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times with me, only on DD India.